Yeah, that's working. All right, well, good morning, everyone, again. So as I mentioned earlier, we are like right up in the middle of a series that I'm doing that I kind of refer to in my own mind as Harry Potter and the Hero's Journey. It's actually based on a research paper I wrote in seminary in metaphysics. And what I am doing is taking a look at the power of myth and using Joseph Campbell's The Hero with a Thousand Faces, which if you're interested in taking a look at that, I think we still have a few copies in the bookstore. But in The Hero with a Thousand Faces, Joseph Campbell takes and looks at the stories that we have told, the mythologies of hundreds of stories across scores of cultures, and how they essentially all tell the same story. They all tell our story. He calls it the monomyth. And it is essentially one of a hero who leaves, is initiated, and then returns. And as I talked about last week, that is really nothing more or less than the evolution of our own souls. He's really describing our soul's journey on its arc from the oneness that we came from, we separated from, we are being initiated in some way. Many of us would say, we're being initiated every day, right? And at some point, our souls will return to that oneness that they came from. It may be after this life, it may be after several more lives, it may be millennia on into the future. It may not be until this universe collapses into the final black hole and we all get pushed out into another universe billions of years from now. But it'll happen at some point. And in the meanwhile, we might as well enjoy the ride, right? So, last week we talked about the departure series of the hero's journey. This week we are taking a look at that middle portion, where all the interesting stuff happens, right? If you remember, Robert F. Kennedy went to South Africa at one point, and he described to them an ancient Chinese curse, "May you live in interesting times." Actually, there is no such Chinese curse. He was just trying to get a message across to the South Africans. So, in this section, this initiation portion of the hero's journey, there's half a dozen different subsections. I don't know if I'm going to get to unpack all of them today. I know that you guys probably have some things you want to do on this glorious, cooler afternoon. Amen? So I'll try to contain myself. But the first section that is part of initiation, Joseph Campbell calls the road of trials. And what he says is, once having traversed the threshold, the hero moves in a dream landscape of curiously fluid, ambiguous forms where he must survive a succession of trials. This is a favorite phase of the myth adventure. It has produced a world literature of miraculous tests and ordeals. And that certainly is the interesting, juicy part of all the stories that we've gotten to read. That's where Harry gets into the Chamber of Secrets and the Goblet of Fire and all the things that he has to get through. And as we've been looking at the life of Jesus of Nazareth, when you take a look at what he did, his journey that essentially took him from Nazareth to Jerusalem was a continuing series of trials. Started off at a wedding when they ran out of wine, right? What's interesting is that the first thing they both did that was obviously not normal was a transmutation. They took one thing and turned it into another. If you remember when I talked about it in the first week that we discussed the actual pieces of the hero's journey, Harry, on his cousin's birthday, made a piece of glass disappear. He turned glass into air, and Jesus is recorded as having turned water into wine. There are so many interesting parallels in their stories. But he then went on to do things like take, a little bit of food and feed a whole bunch of people with it. He healed all sorts of people of all kinds of different things. He healed lepers. He healed the lame. He healed the blind. He brought a dead guy back. It's like they just keep getting tougher and tougher, right? Okay, you can heal a lame guy here. Here's some people have had leprosy their whole lives. No problem, got that. Oh, you can do that? Well, here's a blind guy. What can you do with this guy? Well, I'm going to take some mud, and I'm going to spit on it, and I'm going to put it in his eyes. He's good to go. Yeah, okay, right. Now we got a dead dude. Dude's been dead for about 3 days. Let's see what you can do with this. He's like, okay, thanks, God. Got it. On to the next thing. And he goes on and on and on through his series of trials. Interesting that they both end up with the same final trial. They end up with overcoming death. In Harry's story, the actual driver of the plot is kind of uncovered at the very beginning. In the first book, we discover that this villain, whose name is Voldemort, is essentially trying to live forever, right? He was afraid of dying. He was a wizard who did not want to die. And he didn't want to die so badly that he was willing to murder other people to create these little objects that would contain parts of his soul, so that if his body died, his soul was still bound to the world and he would be able to return. This idea came to me, and I'm going to read it to you exactly as I wrote it in my notes. Note, this is the same, and I wrote it in all caps, this is the same fear that drives the foundation of the traditional Christian myth. The fear of an afterlife that is torment and the promise of an eternal life. Chew on that for a second. Since way back in the old days, one of the things that the human tribe has sadly done is we have tried to sacrifice other people so that we can live, right? And if you look at the cultures in South America that sacrificed thousands of members of their tribe to the gods to, make the gods happy. You look at all the people that threw virgins into volcanoes, thinking that that's going to make the volcano god happy and make everything quiet down. And all of the other human sacrifices that came up to us. This is actually the basis of the sacrifices that were absorbed into early Judaism, right? Except at a certain point, they decided, instead of killing each other, we'll just sacrifice a cow or a sheep or some of the first fruits of our harvest, right? And then at some point, they also figured out, if we do that, the guys that are our priests, they can take some of that stuff that we sacrifice and they can just be priests instead of them having to worry about going out and tending sheep and cattle. And it all kind of, worked together into a thing. So they changed that. But the basis of the religion that came forward with Jesus was still about sacrifice. In theological circles, we call it substitutionary atonement. And what that essentially means is that in order to make God happy, and this goes clear back to the same people that threw the virgins into the volcanoes, in order to make God happy, somebody's got to die, and I don't want it to be me. Right? So we're going to toss somebody to God, and we'll be good. So Voldemort essentially was doing that. He was tossing other people to the universe, sacrificing them so that he could stay alive. And the whole deal behind traditional Christianity has been, we're going to toss this Jesus guy to God so that we can get away with whatever it is we got away with. But we're good. We're going to live forever in paradise because he died. Does anybody else find this fascinating? I think this is really cool stuff. That traditional Christians operate under the same fear that Voldemort did. Right? That just blew me away when it hit me. I was like, wow. And I don't think that J.K. Rowling was specifically saying, I'm going to illustrate that when I write this. This is the power of myth. It digs into the deepest stuff in our psyche. It tells the stories that have been locked away in our subconscious, in that larger subconscious, our cultural unconscious. It tells those stories, we carry them forward And that's the way our culture develops. That's the way that we frame ourselves and our lives. So when we look at what is called the road of trials and where it takes our heroes, right? So Harry's road of trials, he is continually coming up in front of this guy who was afraid to die. And as he grows up, as he gains in power, he's finally given his real destiny. That is, when he begins the story, he's referred to as the boy who lived, because in the prehistory of the story, Voldemort tried to kill him. And the magic kind of bounced off Harry because his mother, in sacrificing herself for him, protected him somehow. Her love protected him. So when Voldemort's spell bounced back and nearly killed Voldemort, he stayed alive because he had those magic objects that kept him alive. Well, what Harry comes to find out is that there's more to being a master of death than killing other people. He goes after these magic items that are called the Deathly Hallows, and they are items that a good wizard might use to try to stay alive forever. They don't require you to kill anyone else. Jesus also has a road that leads him to a similar place where he becomes a master of death. In the tail end of Harry's story, he is visiting the town where he was born in and where his parents were killed. And he goes to their graves, and on their headstone is a Bible verse. The last enemy to be defeated is death. That's from 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 20 through 26. I'm going to read this, and I'm not going to open it all the way up because I could do an entire sermon just on this verse. There's so much juicy metaphysical stuff in it. But let's remember as I read this that when we talk about the Christ here, we are talking about our God consciousness made manifest in us, okay? That God consciousness that pours through and views the universe and creates the universe through us. But in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have died. For since death came through a human being, the resurrection of the dead has also come through a human being. For as all die in Adam, who is sense consciousness, right? So all will be made alive in Christ, which is God consciousness. But each in his own order. Christ the first fruits, then at his coming, those who belong to Christ. Then comes the end when he hands over the kingdom to God the Father after he has destroyed every ruler and every authority and power, all those worldly things that we think are in charge. For he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. The last enemy to be destroyed is death. So, for me, when I go into the Gospels and I look at who this guy was that wandered around and talked, he was not so different from Harry. The myth that has grown up around him, oddly enough, is very much like Voldemort. Now, the next couple of sections both deal with something that we call the goddess. All right? So the second subsection of this particular phase is the meeting with the goddess. And I love this. Woman, in the picture language of mythology, represents the totality of what can be known. And that's kind of a double entendre. The hero is the one who comes to know. So what Harry comes to know through meeting the goddess, who in his story is his mother, is that love is greater than death. Love means more than death. You know, some of you are students of the Course in Miracles, and, you know, of course, you guys would tell me that there's only two things, right? Love and fear, right? So That is what Harry comes to learn through his goddess experience. And it becomes very clear to him in his last experience of his mother, which is as he's about to walk to his death, he summons, with one of the Deathly Hallows, the spirit of his mother and his father and one of his former teachers to help give him the courage to face what he has to face. Now, there is no similar event with Mary in Jesus' story, but boy, is she ever depicted in traditional Christian myth the way that Campbell describes the goddess. He says that the goddess is the incarnation of the promise of perfection, the soul's assurance that at the conclusion of its exile in a world of organized inadequacies, the bliss that once was known will be known again. The comforting, the nourishing, the good mother, young and beautiful, who was known to us and even tasted in the remotest past. Time sealed her away, yet she is dwelling still like one who sleeps in timelessness at the bottom of the timeless sea. In Harry's story, his mother is frozen when he's 1 year old. That's when she dies. And in the depictions we have of the Jesus myth, we never see Mary as a 48, 49-year-old woman, right? Which is what she would have been when he died. What do we see Mary as? The young, beautiful woman who is that ideal of the goddess in the myth. Now, what's interesting about the next section, which we don't see so much either in Harry's story or in Jesus's, but we all see in our stories, I got to word this carefully, is, and this is Joseph's wording, woman as the temptress. All right? Now, what this is an allegorical comparison, okay? And in myth, the woman as temptress, and I want you to think of Samson and Delilah, is a great example. What Joseph Campbell says is, what it represents is the dichotomy between the world as we want it to be, as we hope for it, as we envision it or dream about it, and the world we really get. Right? Samson thought he was getting one thing with Delilah. Turns out she's a whole different person, and he gets a whole different thing at the end of the story. That's one of the more classic examples of the temptress. But how many of us have been tempted by something in life, and then when we finally got it, wasn't what I thought this was going to be at all? Whether it was... Try to keep it together, Bruce. Whether it was an actual temptress, which it might have been in Bruce's case because he's having too much fun with this. Or, it could have been anything. It could have been a job. It could have been moving to a certain place that we thought, wow, this is going to be the place of my dreams. Everything is going to work for me here, right? Whatever it might be, it's that the temptation of an expectation of a reality that does not work out, essentially. So that is the woman as temptress. Now, it doesn't really pop up in either Harry or Jesus' story with the actual representation of a female, although I'm sure that in that moment when they both realized, oh, dude, I got to die for this to go any further, that was probably smack in the face. Oh, I'm getting a different reality than I expected to have. This next section is one that some of you who are Harry Potter fans may want to burn me at the stake for saying. But it's called Atonement with the Father. And in the arc of the hero's journey, when we've gotten down the road of trials, at some point we need to come to an atonement with the Father. Now, as I read about what the Father was, it became very clear to me. Harry's father, at least for the purposes of myth in this story, was not James Potter, his actual biological father. And it was not the person that many of us would probably name when we think of who is Harry's father figure if we've read the books, seen the movies. And most of us would probably say Albus Dumbledore, who was the headmaster at Hogwarts and Harry's friend and mentor. No, In the mythological arc, Harry's father was Severus Snape. For the ogre aspect of the father, the ogre aspect, right, is a reflex of the victim's own ego, derived from the sensational nursery scene that's been left behind but projected before. And Campbell goes on to describe it, and then he comes down and says, one must have a faith that the Father is merciful, and then a reliance on that mercy. So the center of belief is transferred outside of the bedeviling God's tight scale earring, and the dreadful ogres dissolve. You see, Harry and Severus are bound together by their love for the same woman, Harry's mother, Lily. And although Harry has spent his entire relationship with Severus thinking this guy is just here to torment me, the truth is that Severus had spent his life protecting Harry and guarding him as he grew up, trying to push him to become more, because Severus, more than probably anyone there, knew how dangerous Harry's enemy was. Severus, as he lays dying, transmits to Harry his memories. In this magical world, they have a way of viewing each other's memories. They take them out with their wands and they put them in a little jar, and then they take them to this magic bowl and they drop the memories in the bowl, and then you can kind of jump in, and it's sort of like being in a hologram, and you can see somebody else's memories. So Harry gets to see Severus's memories, gets to see how much he loves Harry's mother, gets to see how Severus took on the role of Harry's protector and then swore Dumbledore to secrecy because he didn't want anyone to know that he was trying to help James Potter's son. And Severus was beside himself when he found out that Dumbledore's plan all along was to raise Harry to be killed by Voldemort, so that Voldemort could finally be killed because, and this is a big time spoiler for anybody that hadn't read the books yet, those little objects that Voldemort made to hide pieces of his soul in, Harry accidentally became one when Voldemort killed his mother. So Harry had to die in order for Voldemort to be completely and finally destroyed. And it is at that moment when Harry finds that he is finally atoned with Severus. And at that moment, he then knows what is his to do. And he goes on to meet his death. The exact same thing happens to Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. So this is from Mark chapter 14. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took with him Peter and James and John and began to be distressed and agitated. And he said to them, "I am deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and keep awake." And going a little farther, he threw himself on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. He said, "Abba," which is Aramaic for daddy. "Father, for you all things are possible. Remove this cup from me. Yet not what I want, but what you want." And so in the very same way, Jesus is atoned with the Father, and he is also willing to lay down his life for his friends. The next subsection of this stage of initiation is one we call apotheosis, which is essentially deification. It's defined as the elevation or exaltation of a person to the rank of a god. For Harry, this involved his death and his restoration to life. He goes into the forbidden forest. He allows himself to be killed. He then has what we would describe today as a near-death experience, and in it he is offered a choice. He can go on. And what he becomes very aware of in that near-death experience is that going on would be very easy and pleasant, that death would indeed be a very lovely thing. But instead, he chooses to return and finish what it was that he came here to do. And the same thing happens with Jesus. If Jesus' story dies, or if the story ends with him dying and just staying on the cross, we're probably not talking about him today. His story probably doesn't get made into the level of myth and inspire the largest religion the world has ever known. But his story continued, and he also was exalted. He was lifted to the rank of a God. And I love what Campbell says about this. He says, the God-like being is a pattern of the divine state to which the human hero attains, who has gone beyond the last terrors of ignorance. And that was what set Harry apart from Voldemort. Harry was no longer afraid of death. Harry was no longer ignorant of what it was going to be. He knew what it was. Campbell says, but death was not the end. New life, new birth, new knowledge of existence, so that we live not in this physique only, but in all bodies, in all physiques of the world, as the Bodhisattva was given us. That realization that we are all one, that while our bodies may die and go on, we do not. We are all in this together. We are all part of the Christ, and we all share in this common journey and this common destination. So the final section of the stage of initiation is something called the ultimate boon. And again, this so deals with the idea of life and death. It is very obvious when we look at both of those stories. Campbell says this boon is an answer to a child's mind's anxieties for the integrity of its body, fantasies of restitution, a silent, deep requirement for indestructibility and protection against the bad forces from within and without, begin to direct the shaping of the psyche. It is the desire for that boon of immortality that drives Voldemort, and which, incidentally, drives the power behind the traditional Christian myth. So Harry comes back with this ultimate boon, which is A, the knowledge that death's no big deal. But he also finally becomes the rightful heir to those items which in his world marked him the master of death, the deathly hallows. For Jesus, the ultimate boon is simply represented to the people of his time as the empty tomb. That thing that they all feared had no power over him, and kind of by proxy, it has no power over any of us. So for us today, what we can take from this, and what I want all of us to examine when we leave today, is I want us to be able to ask ourselves this question: am I living my life afraid of dying, or am I living a life of love worth dying for? Please join me in prayer. Sweet Spirit, we are so deeply grateful for this journey that our souls are on, for the sunshine, the rain, the dark nights, the ogres, the things that call us to be greater than we are, the things that point us back to your greatness living in, through, and as us. For this greatness, this spirit, this thing that we may call the Christ, but is known by many names. This experience of divinity in life. For that, for your love that lives through us, and for each other, for this journey we make together, we say thank you. Thank you, Spirit. So it is. King as the light of God, as the light, 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 as the light of God. We are walking as the light, as the light, as the light. We are walking as the light of God.
Good morning.
Morning.
I am Kristen Knight. I am the Director of Youth and Family Ministries here at Unity. Yay!
Yeah.
Thank you. So we are in week 3 of our Lumendorf curriculum, and that is the School for Magical and Mystical Children. So this week we concentrated on platform 9 3/4, and if you don't know what that is basically a brick wall that you walk through. So we focused on breaking through our own barriers. So we wrote down on Post-it notes our fears and things that we wanted to go through. All right, Wiley. He's mine. So we wrote down our fears, and then we built this whole huge wall with our bricks, and then every kid busted through it like 3 times. We had so much fun doing that today. So that was our day, and we actually have a special surprise for you because October is, hang on, Barry. October is pastoral.
Morning,
pastors.
beloved.
All right, hit it, Barry.
You may have a seat if you can. This is the day the Lord has made, and we shall rejoice and be glad in it. This morning, I'd like to share a very familiar story with you. A few years back, a young lady went off to college.
Great. Here we go again with that story about the elephant. I mean, don't you have another story to prove your point? I've heard it like 3 times this year already. And you know what? It's not even that funny. Yeah, I said it. Not even funny. Maybe I should fill out one of those comment cards. It's not like I'm asking all that much. I come here every Sunday or so for some coffee, fellowship, and to hear a new message. The least you can do is make it fresh and insightful and funny and moving and theologically sound and historically accurate every week. Maybe I am asking too much. Probably way too much. I mean, Pastor did visit Joe in the hospital and celebrated with us when Michelle was born, and was there when Susan lost her mom, and encouraged me to fight for my family when we were on the brink of separation. Now that I think about it, Pastor's been like a counselor, a mentor, and a friend when I needed it the most. Pastors are awesome. Go ahead, Pastor. Tell that story again. I'll even laugh this time.
Okay, yay!
Wow.
Okay, Anna, would you go get that, please? So October is Pastor Appreciation Month, so we appreciate you.
Thank you.
So on behalf of the youth, we have this. We made this for you this morning. Anna, if you'll bring it up. It says, Reverend Charles, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yay! All right. And y'all can have a seat if you want. 2 of our girls have something they wanted to say.
Since it is Pastor's Appreciation Month, I just wanted to say thank you for everything that you do, and we all love you.
Oh, thank you, Anna.
So, piggybacking off of what she said, I just want to acknowledge that you're a really great guy. You don't tell boring stories about elephants, and you're really awesome.
Well, thank you.
So now, Bruce, if you would come up here.
Okey-doke. Well, that was a hard act to follow all this. I didn't know all that was coming. Anyhow, on behalf of the board and the congregation, just wanted to give you a plaque of appreciation and for all you do. And, this was perfect. The film, I don't even really need to say any more. It was perfect. But being on the board for 4 years, I've been here since day one. And personally, I just want to say thank you for everything. So many people don't realize they see you for an hour up here. Don't realize all that you do. I mean, all the preparation for this and outreach, and I mean, there's a lot more than people realize. So thank you very much.
So we are going to sing, and then in just a minute, if you will join us out there, we have a cake.
Yay!
Oh, that's right. And we would like to bless you with the unity blessing. The words are going to be up here on the screen. All right. Reverend Charles, we love you. We bless you. We truly appreciate you. And we behold the Christ in you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, let's sing the peace song. I heard there's cake. And let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, the peace that was meant to be, with God as creator, family all are we. Let us walk with each other in perfect harmony. Let this be the moment now, right now. With every step I take, let this be my joyous vow, to take each moment and live each moment in peace eternally. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. The light of God surrounds us. I am the light of God. The love of God enfolds us. I am the love of God. The power of God protects us. I am the power of God. And the presence of God watches over us. I am the presence of God. Wherever we are, God is. Wherever I am, God is, and all is well. Have a wonderful week, Unity of Birmingham.